I think there's like a whole fear of missing out. And so everybody has to out identify each other. I'm hoping next year that there's going to be some sanity here.
You're listening to It's About Data, episode 35. This time we're discussing AWS reInvent 2025.
Tony, you are at a very large show right now, a very large conference. Which one is it that you're at?
I'm trying to remember. No, it was AWS reInvent. It's
Yes.
kind of like it's where the technology year ends.
Yeah.
It's kind of like all roads lead to reInvent eventually. Myself and about 60,000 of my closest friends.
Yeah. And you're also always looking for like sort of counter announcements, right? Like, what is AWS going to announce to counter whatever else everyone else is doing before
and also
in the year?
what's going to set the theme for the year ahead.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And so this has always been a very a real sort of I've always found reInvent to be the real inflection point of the year in terms of here's where kind of summing everything up and where are we going from here.
Yeah.
And in a word, it probably is not going to be a great shock to anybody out there. It's agents.
Of course.
And I would say, my own assessment is I think they got a little too carried away on agents, even to the point today where the data and AI keynote had no data. It was all agents.
So they're just going to call it the AI keynote in the future.
Well, look, there's a pendulum swing that's going to be swinging back and forth on this. And the thing is that, my general feel on the industry is I think we are, overhyping agents. Yes, agents are important. They are happening. But as you and I basically discussed when we were at when we were on stage, on the main stage at Teradata, it's like we're really at the point of really asking questions. I think I do see some interest. AWS had some very good announcements there. And we'll get into it. But I think the degree of attention that's, I don't think that basically we need to, picking up my cup of water, they're starting to clean up here. This is the end of hours in the analyst summit of reInvent. But
last
anyway,
call.
I think that, pretty much there. I think I got the last bottle of Pellegrino here. But I think the industry as a whole is, I think there's like a whole fear of missing out. And so everybody has to out identify each other. I'm hoping next year that there's going to be some sanity here. But kind of dive in a little bit on what I call the God shot, which is that, AWS, they are a force of nature. And just some of the latest numbers, they're on a run rate of 132 billion this year. And that's up 22 billion over the past year. And as CEO Matt Garman pointed out, that's more revenue, 22 billion, not the 22 billion is more revenue than half of the Fortune 500. And that's just how much AWS grew this year.
That's just insane, especially in this year of like huge infrastructure investments.
Yeah.
It's useful to remember that AWS is still the infrastructure cloud heavy hitter, right, by far.
Obviously they're the reference point. But let's start. I want to try to start. It'll be a little bit rapid fire here, but just to give you a taste. So obviously, AI was very much front and center in agents, and of course there were several. So I'm going to be a lot of these are going to be sort of updates because basically they announced things like Agent Core and Kiro back in the summer. Mm-hmm. It seems that the July timeframe is when AWS is really is making that kind of like their sort of inflection point for AI. I think they realize they can't wait till reInvent to get this stuff out. And Agent Core is essentially the deployment environment for agents. They've added a couple things which I think are very important and relate to what you and I were talking about at Teradata, which is basically a policy piece. And this is these are real-time deterministic behavioral controls on your non-deterministic agents.
Got it. Okay. And so are we talking code? Is this more traditional code to bound the behavior of these agents?
Yeah. Notice we're not looking at language models to judge the behavior of your agents.
Exactly. Yeah.
And in that same vein, we're also adding evaluations. These are two pieces that they're adding to Agent Core. So I think they have about 8 different modules right now.
Yeah.
If you're implementing Agent Core, you don't have to, it's very modular. You don't have to do the whole kit and caboodle. Evaluations basically will continue as your policy places basically, deterministic, basically, I guess sort of guardrails around it, behavioral controls, probably better than guardrails, because guardrails is kind of like, let's make sure, no, these are controls. Evaluations will continually inspect, agent behavior to make sure they don't start doing things like trying to blackmail people on your staff because there's a certain intent to basically execute strategy A. So those are a couple interesting additions to Agent Core. They've also, along with this, added what they call frontier agents. And when they initially described it as very scalable agents, I thought these guys are crazy. But when they explained it a little bit more, this is really more on the idea of fit for purpose agents, and I think these are the types of agents we are going to be seeing, a lot more of, in the near term. One is an autonomous agent, for Kiro, and it's basically automating complex software development processes. And the key here is that it has a long-term memory. In other words, it maintains context.
Okay.
So the idea is that it will remember what you were trying to develop and where you were going with it, as opposed to having to start a session new, because obviously you're not going to roam, and complex software is not built in a day.
Right.
And chances are it's also going to be a team project. And so this will maintain. It's kind of like maintaining state with transactions. This is maintaining essentially the context. I mean, context is the state of AI, just like in MCP. There's also a security agent, with the idea is that this agent will build in security during the build process, not okay, what do we implement after the fact?
Yeah. Well, and again, I wonder how much is that really AI and how much is it more traditional tools like static code checker, static code analysis, that looks, I'll be very curious. Yeah.
An agent, look, just because it's an agent doesn't mean that it's not going to implement, traditional tools.
Yeah. Because those tools work. I mean, we've been using them for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. So let's reinvent the wheel. Why not? Then there's same idea, DevOps agent. The idea here is sort of, let's take a look at resources, and when things are starting to go south, let's try and nip things in the bud. So in a way, it's a sense kind of like the evaluations agent and agent for it's like, this is kind of continually looking at what's your resource consumption, so that essentially we don't avoid we can avoid a meltdown here. Of course, nothing's complete without talking about silicon. And of course, basically, Google's starting to get very aggressive there in terms of they actually will sell their silicon outside of their their data
set. That was a very big deal. Yeah.
That's not on directly. It's not directly part of AWS's plans, but there's another interesting later on that kind of ends a little bit, adds some nuance to it. But Training 3, they announced it last year. It is now GA, and it's the usual superlatives, and it's like 4 to 5x better performance and better cost and all that sort of stuff. I'm not going to go through. You're always seeing these, every year. But here's the interesting point about this: is that Google has its TPUs, NVIDIA has various GPUs. They don't differentiate in terms of do they do training or inference. Was AWS, Amazon always has. It had training and inferential. And its customers are saying, do we really want the complexity of 2 different types of chips? And they're essentially, what I'm really seeing, and they also start to say here, saying customers are using training for inference. And I think the inference of all this, is that I think inferential essentially is probably going to eventually be, they didn't say this, but it might take, I think, inferential, probably recede to the background, if not, basically fade out, and that training is really going to be their core platform, because they really have to focus their resources here.
That's very interesting, because it's going back with Google, TPUs historically were just for inference, and it was really recently that they added the training capability to them and kind of merged those capabilities. So, as you said, I'll be interested to see where AWS goes with this in the future.
Nothing's completed without talking about Nova, their model. And yes, they are claiming that, customers are now, they now feel like they're starting to get some real inflection point on adoption. But more the point is an interesting addition to Nova, which is Nova Forge. And the idea behind that is that this is for basically teams that are trying to fine-tune models. And the advantage of fine tuning is obviously you're shaping the model more towards, what your data reflects and what you need better. But the danger with fine tuning, just like you can overfit and over training model, is that if you really go to get very heavily down the fine tuning road, that the model can essentially forget what it was originally tuned.
Yeah, catastrophic forgetting.
Or trained on, I should say.
Yeah.
And so what they're doing here, this is sort of a nuanced idea of like, as you're going through waves of pre-training and post-training, that it will also blend in some selected, curated, AWS curated data sets to essentially remind Nova of where it came from and what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. So basically, it's a very interesting sort of nuance there. This is the type of thing that as we this is definitely a good example of the learning curve.
Yeah.
Where as we get into this, we realize, okay, now we realize this, we have these these impacts, and so we need to now kind of couch them. It's the type of thing which you're only going to learn by doing.
Yeah. And it's funny because the status of fine tuning is still kind of ambiguous, because I think many companies that have tried to do this have found that it wasn't particularly effective because of catastrophic forgetting.
Right.
And because you can get so much out of like one-shot learning, for example, or RAG, other techniques.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I have one more set of AI announcements. And again, I'm greatly telescoping. But, but we were talking before about AI, or AWS is not directly cellular chips, but they are going to start selling what they call AI factories.
Oh,
and these are essentially very deluxe versions of Outposts. I mean, it's not the same hardware, but it's the same idea.
Yeah.
Essentially, what I view it as Outposts on AI steroids. And these are basically mini data centers that have specifically to do AI that AWS will manage. Now, there's some similarities to what Oracle does with Clouded Customer, where Oracle is managing it. And the idea here, it's a subset. You're not getting all AWS services. Just like on Outpost, you don't get all however many hundred AWS services. You just can't squeeze that in. I mean,
it's a tasting menu out of the
But the thing is, this comes out of what AWS. I mean, this is not an isolated thing. I mean, they announced Outpost about 5 years ago, and when that happened, in the analyst room, we all had to change our diapers. It's like we were not expecting to hear this. But since then, they've also come up with like Wavelength, which goes into basically telecom, into telecom 5G facilities. And they also have local zones for where they're like, fairly like, dense concentrations of local customers in a certain industry sector. And for example, is like Hollywood. So that kind of rounds that out, in terms of, AI. Again, I think we'll definitely want to follow this one. There's another thing, before we break into data, which again, this was kind of an off year for data at reInvent. But there's one other interesting announcement, and kind of AWS really played it down, which was multi-cloud.
Yeah.
Repeat after me, multi-cloud.
And we've seen this quietly with Oracle, for example.
Well, not so quietly with Oracle. Oracle's been very loud about it. It's more, and we see it more. We've seen it somewhat, with Google, with Omni. But this is where, and for many years, and even AWS will own up to it, is that even vendors that were exhibiting in the expo floor were not allowed to say multi-cloud. It was an actual formal prohibition. It was verboten. And obviously that's toned down. But now AWS is realizing, look, as cloud adoption matures, the fact is that, look, any large enterprise is going to have one of everything. They're likely to use more than one cloud.
Especially with AI, right? Like you see these major players signing AI deals with multiple cloud providers, multiple hardware providers.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And like, while AWS says like our models are good enough, they're not going to say, well, customers want to use, Google for AI, but a lot of customers are going to want to use Google for AI. And what's interesting is the first agreement that they've concluded is with Google Cloud. And what it is, it's basically playing on what Oracle originally did with Azure. It was how Oracle started its multi-cloud strategy about 5 or 6 years ago with Azure, which is a high-speed interconnect.
Yeah.
But AWS is taking it, it's further than it's broader than that, broader and deeper than that, which is that, yes, there will be a high-speed interconnect. AWS will manage it, which means that you won't have to do all the configurations. You won't have to basically deal with all the security. This is essentially will be an extension of the AWS cloud that's on the wire that connects to, in this case, Google Cloud. And I'm going to expect that, I personally expect that that Azure will come subsequently in the coming year. I mean, I think it's kind of an open secret there.
Yeah, they're kind of going to have to. Now, what's interesting here is that they're not locating someone else's hardware in their data centers, from what you're telling me.
That's not going to happen. Put it this way, it makes sense with Oracle because Oracle data centers, OCI, and I'm actually writing a report on this, can actually start very small, as small as 3 racks.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is, by nature, even though Oracle says that they offer a full range of infrastructure as a service offerings, the fact is that most OCI customers are going to come to them for database or Fusion applications.
Correct. Yep.
I mean, so it's going to be by nature, even though Oracle won't call it that, it's in practice, OCI is going to be a specialized cloud. So you're not going to have, yes. And on the other hand, let's say OCI is a small cloud. They basically do, NVIDIA superclusters because they have an amazing architecture that basically is very flat, but can scale from very small to very large.
Yeah.
But the smallness is what gets them into basically, into multi-cloud situations where they can actually go inside. But this is not that. This is basically where AWS, we'll take responsibility for connecting to, another cloud. They'll provide the managed interconnects. Essentially, they're also backing this up with professional services, which eventually, I mean, it's basically kind of to jumpstart this, but they will basically do full assessments for multi-cloud readiness because it's not an easy thing. It's not like I can just set up this database and it's going to it's going to work in 3 clouds or this application.
Yeah, it's never that simple, right? Like it's all kinds of integration work and reliability testing. Yeah.
And especially with AI, you may have, with agents where you have things going back and forth.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a neat thing. And so therefore, I think it's a very important thing that's saying, like, this is not just we're just going to turn on a switch. So it's a very thoughtful approach to it. And a very interesting sort of, kind of 180 for a company that basically, for time immemorial, it considered itself as the center of the universe and realized it's a center of the universe.
Yeah, I mean, they're feeling the pressure, obviously, right? Like they hear footsteps and they realize that they have to start integrating more and acknowledging it publicly.
Yeah. Okay. Let's turn to data. And data really basically took a back seat here. But there was one announcement. It was the end of Matt Garman's, opening keynote.
Okay.
And Matt, he did an amazing keynote, and the last part of his keynote, about last 10 minutes, he did a lightning round to see if he could get cram 30 announcement in 10 minutes. It was almost like a game show there. But he's got a good sense of humor. But anyway, at the tail end, it was kind of like, and the one more thing, kind of like the Steve Jobs thing, and one more thing, database savings agreement. And this is something which, basically, that they've offered for compute for a number of years.
Yeah.
But for databases, it's actually, and put it this way, where this has really been implemented, it's not for big customers because they all tend to have their enterprise agreements, but this is essentially really directed towards essentially kind of the broad, let's say, not just small, mid-size, but also mid to mid-size, large, but not large enough to have your enterprise, your custom agreement, custom contract. And the idea is to simplify, adding capacity. And so the ulterior motive of all this is that basically serverless is mature enough to now to become essentially production grade for transaction databases, for operational databases.
Interesting.
And so the savings on this will be up to up to around 20% if you're doing basically reserved instances or committed instances, but up to 35% if you're going serverless. Now it's different for different database platforms. They've announced it for about 9 different platforms. I don't have the list here. The common thread: these are operational platforms. These are not data warehouses, where essentially usage tends to be much more spiky.
Yeah. So Redshift has a serverless option, but that was not part of this announcement.
It was not part of this announcement, and it's not where the customer pain was. But basically said this was the single most requested thing that they've gotten from customers. And Matt Garman gave the green light to it. And again, and my first question when I sat down with a guy who basically led the team who created this was, what did Corey Quinn think about this? And Corey was he was smiles on this one. And yes, not without his critiques. Corey this guy knows pricing backwards and forwards. I think he would probably admit he's Rain Man in that.
he knows all the gotchas too, right? Like when he posts, he's always posting about the gotchas on AWS in a very snarky way. Yeah.
So I'm going to go through the rest of the data announcements are kind of anticlimactic this year.
Okay.
We're really in kind of an off cycle. I think the most interesting ones from a data standpoint, S3. Amazon continues to essentially mature S3, not into just miscellaneous cloud storage, but into different tiers of storage. And last year they introduced S3 tables, which is an optimized form of S3 for working with Apache Iceberg open tables. And this is part of what we're seeing with different vendors. There are Iceberg implementations. There's different strategies to optimize performance. And this essentially was AWS's, and they're putting in what they call intelligent tiering. Now it's an age-old concept, data tiering, but for basically cooler temperature data, you could save up to 80%.
They automatically push it down. Yeah,
makes sense when you talk about a data lake where essentially things are going to literally blow hot and cold, and where you're going to be piling up a lot of data. Do you want to be paying for premium access for all that data that you have in a lake?
Exactly. Even, in the days of Hadoop, a lot of that data was just archival data, realistically. There wasn't a very high chance that someone was going to be looking at it in the future.
Oh, a few more things, and then finally my one big gripe.
Yeah, okay.
I do have a big gripe here. They've added, they've really vastly improved S3 vectors. Those stored vectors in S3, and essentially, and they're very these are it's optimized S3 for vectors. So performance and scale, and of course at the cost of S3. And so it's a very powerful proposition. And finally, just one other, couple small things before I get into my bit of a rant, which is that on Redshift, yes, you can now do Iceberg writes, but there's still I still see some shortcomings in Redshift. For instance, even though they've added vector support all along, not in Redshift because they don't want to. The team there still feels like they want to keep the database kind of nice and compact. They feel this is going to bloat it. I disagree with that, and I think a bunch of us did, but that's where they are right now.
Yeah.
But I will go into my there's some other incremental improvements to Redshift. I don't want to sell that short, but to me, the big missing piece was semantics in general.
Yeah.
And the thing is, AWS has pieces of it. They do, and I'm speaking now, through the SageMaker team, SageMaker Unified Studio, SageMaker Lakehouse, in that they do have, there is semantics, from Quick, which is, used to be called Q. It's now called Quick. Quick, not Click, Quick. And so they're definitely, which is kind of the equivalent of the semantics that Power BI has, for instance. They do have lineage in terms of where the data is from. They're probably going to be adding lineage in terms of how the data is being used. There are different definitions of lineage to include whatever. They have pieces if they don't. This is something where I think really Microsoft stole a move on them there, basically with Fabric IQ, which I'm currently doing some research on, writing up a report. Fabric IQ was very impressive. And I'm hoping we can get somebody from Microsoft up on the show here to really talk about it. But
yeah, definitely. And just overall vision and where the industry is going. That's
oh
what I want
gosh,
to hear. Yeah.
that's a to do. But the thing is that Fabric, basically IQ, is the semantic. Well, semantics and intelligence. Semantics, actually, Microsoft's interesting how they define it, which is semantics is essentially the business term for the data that you use for reports, and that came from Power BI.
Yeah.
But they have what they call ontology, which is what your organization is, how it's structured, who's in it, what do you do, what are the rules, what's a likely action, what's not.
What are the business units? Like who manages the finances, who manages the product? Yeah,
exactly.
Shipping,
or it's kind of like who's on first.
Yeah.
So that to me is a huge missing piece. And I was very disappointed that I didn't hear anything. And I think part of it's that this year the folk they've been doubling down on data, just like everybody has, but I think it's been to the detriment of data.
Yeah.
And as I said, even in the data and AI keynote this morning, there was no data. I mean, we did get, we sat with the team this afternoon, and they kind of went through, but still, it's pretty much incremental at this point. I think they're between waves. I expect next year that we will see, I mean, there's a pendulum swing, but I think they missed the boat on semantics right now. And I think this is something, because I think semantics are going to be really hot. It's basically, I see semantic spheres of influence, emerging, and especially, and it's reflected in what the Snowflake has felt the urgency to convene an industry initiative in terms of how to make sure that my definition of customer, can be understood by your definition of customer, or how we can basically square them.
And in the old days, before AI, like 4 years ago, semantics were still hot back then, but the assumption was that people in your organization has institutional knowledge. Can agents have institutional knowledge? Well, yes, with the semantic layer.
Yeah. So that's basically all I got, which is basically it's a thimbleful of what came through the fire hydrant. How is that for a mixed metaphor?
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not doing too well in that department.
Okay. You're probably completely brain fried at this point.
Oh yeah, my brain is basically on scrambled eggs. This is your brain on reInvent at the tail end of the conference, and everybody's bailing. And I got the last bottle of Pellegrino.
Yeah. Last call.
Exactly. Okay. Anyway, so a lot of stuff here.
Well, fantastic. Well, this should be going out to our listeners and watchers very shortly, probably.
Yeah, we tried to make this short, and it still came close to a half hour.
It did, but there was a lot of stuff to talk about. So
you got it. Yeah. Sounds good.
All right, sounds good.
Talk to you soon.
Talk to you very soon.